All right, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, how to create a CMMC compliance program. While we're waiting for everyone to dial in, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. First of all, if you have any questions, you can definitely put that in the QA. It's hard to check both the QA and the chat, so you can chat with each other if you'd like, but if you have a question, it'd be awesome if you posted it in the QA. I've got my colleague Sarah on the line with me here, and she will stop me and answer let me know if there's some questions that I need to answer. Depending on what the question is, we might just answer that in the middle of the presentation, but certainly at the end. All right. So let's go ahead and get rolling. Oh, and then for those of you that are interested, we are recording this session, and the recording will be made available and the slide deck for all attendees after the presentation. All right. So let's see, what are we going to talk about today? Today, we're going to cover what CMMC is and what it's not. I'm going to share with you how we figured out how to create a CMMC compliance program. And I'm also going to share with you the amazing opportunity for your MSP if you do it too. So I think that most of you do know who I am, but in case you don't, I'm Leia Shilobod. I'm the CEO of Intech Solutions. I'm also known as the IT Princess of Power. I love CMMC compliance. I talk about it all the time. In fact, if somebody starts me talking about it, we usually have to share a safe word so they know they can use that, so I stop. It's really a passion for me. I feel like we are securing our nation's secrets in the defense industrial base, and it is my mission to be able to deliver that kind of security for our nation. I do speak across the country on IT security, documentation, and also IT for manufacturers. Our company is a CMMC RPO. I'm a CCP candidate. We have a test, woohoo, which means I can actually take that and get certified. Yay! For those of us that have been on a similar journey, you're probably just as excited as me that we finally get to have a test and actually get a certification. I am also a certified information security manager. I have to tell you, I love studying for that exam. Every single moment of that was delicious studying for that. I'm also the author of the CMMC IT documentation toolkit. We did a documentary on cybercrime that was released in May, and I'm the author of 2 books available on Amazon. So my disclaimer today is I'm going to share with you what worked for us in doing this work and creating a compliance program for the last 5 years. After like literally hundreds of hours of study and learning, thousands of hours of trial and error, I'm going to share with you what works for us. That does not mean you have to use my method to create a CMMC compliance program. Clearly there's lots of other documentation packages out there too. But if you want the shortcut, I can definitely teach you. So let's start by talking about like what CMMC is. If you're on this call, you probably have an idea about what it is. You should know. It's called the cybersecurity. Oh, look at that! I actually missed maturity model certification. So this actually, the cybersecurity model certification, is what many of us who are on this call have heard before. Something like CMC, CMMI, yep. So yeah, but look at that. I went ahead and did the same thing. Cybersecurity maturity model certification. It's required cybersecurity for any contractor dealing with federal contract information and/or controlled and classified information. It was created for the government to have a modicum of feeling that the information that they have given to the commercial sector was going to be protected. Because as we know, the government doesn't make anything, they just spend our money very well. And they wanted to make sure if their information being released out into the commercial sector in the industrial base, that it was going to be properly protected. It's a maturity model of basic to advanced cybersecurity practices. And last year around this time, we all learned that it went from 5 different levels of maturity to 3. Actually, that announcement was made last year around this time, right before I was about to speak at ConnectWise's IT Nation event. And that was fun. I got to completely redo my slide deck. Maybe things are going to be changing again here as we see the next revision of 800-171 coming in December. It is also a cybersecurity compliance program. So where NIST 800-171 is a list of controls, the CMMC is actually a compliance program. It's kind of the how to implement the controls and what the expectations are to implement those controls. Because it is a program, and it has to do with compliance, it's a journey, it's not a destination. And when I say that, some people are like, well, I don't understand, what does that look like? Well, if any of you on the call have ever had a client ask you, am I secure yet? Then you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you're never secure, right? Like we always continue it's a continuous thing all of the time to assess where we are and to look for risks or weaknesses. And a program and CMMC is the same thing. Compliance is a journey. You never, you can be compliant, but in a moment you can do something or somebody can press a button and you can be out of compliance. So it's a continued process. So what CMMC is not. Well, I'm hoping this isn't you because you're here today. I'm hoping that it's not wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, I want to make a quick buck. Everybody's talking about CMMC. There's so much chatter about it. And really, there's a lot of people out there who are taking advantage of the fact that organizations in the defense industrial base have uncertainty. They're not sure how to implement it. And there definitely are organizations out there that are looking to make a quick buck. That's not what the purpose of this program is. Those of us, and hopefully that's everybody who's on this call today, you're here for a purpose and a mission, and that is to secure the defense industrial base and keep our nation secure and our nation's secrets away from our adversaries. CMMC is not an infrastructure upgrade project. If you happen to be an MSP and you've tried to talk to an OSC and you happen to be of the engineering persuasion, oftentimes that's what I hear my colleagues look at and say, like, oh, okay, let me see, to do CMMC, we have to implement this tool, we have to replace this server, we need to get a new firewall. That might be part of what you do to get compliant or stay compliant, but that's not what CMMC is. It is not an infrastructure upgrade project. It is not GCC high. Oh man, do not get me started, please. If I hear GCC high one more time, I'm going to spit. I've heard this so often. Every time somebody says, I need CMMC compliance, oh, you need GCC high. Okay, GCC high is a platform. It is a high confidence government platform for Microsoft 365. It does not satisfy all of CMMC, and you do not need to have GCC high to be CMMC compliant. That's because it depends on where your data is, how you access it, how it flows into your organization, how you touch it. You might need to use GCC high, or it might be part of the solution for compliance. The CMMC is not GCC high. CMMC is also not anything in a box. Anytime you hear anyone say, I've got CMMC in a box, and I've got an in-the-box solution for you, all you have to do is buy my product, my solution, my whatever, and you have CMMC solved. It is not that. If anyone says that to you, they're lying. So don't buy into that, and then also rethink whether or not you want to engage with that organization. CMMC compliance is also not a tool set. It's not like, tell me, your security stack, tell me what SIM you're using, tell me, what you're using for these different things to get compliant. That is not what CMMC is. It's a program, not a tool set. It's also not something that a company can outsource or set and forget. Now, certainly, because we're all on the line, we are doing something for the defense industrial base that is outsourced, whether that's consulting, whether that's MSP services, whether you're providing some security services. Some pieces of that program are outsourced to you. But however, this is your client's program. This is not your program, and you cannot abdicate. This cannot be abdicated to a third party, nor is it something that can be set and forgotten. You can't say, okay, like we checked all the boxes, we're good. Let's just wait 3 years for an assessment. That's certainly not what it is. Compliance and a program requires ongoing maintenance and ongoing activity in order to prove that the compliance activity is occurring. So how did my company end up needing to figure out CMMC? You may or may not know our story or how we ended up where we are today. So let me share a little bit about that. So my organization, we're an MSP, we were founded in 2006. We're outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There's a lot of manufacturers in our area. So I've had a lot of manufacturing clients. And, way back in like 2016, we got wind of this thing called NIST 800-171. I had never heard of that before. But my local MEP, my Manufacturing Extension Partnership Catalyst Connection, reached out to me and said, our clients, our manufacturers, they need to know about this thing. Would you mind speaking about it for us? And I said, yeah, I will. I had no freaking clue what it was, but I figured I can read it. So I will do that in order to present to it. So I read NIST 800-171 cover to cover many, 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 many times. I had a lot of questions because some of the things seemed strange to me, or the verbiage that they used. I'm like, how does this apply to my clients or their environment? I did present that for Catalyst Connection to the manufacturers. A lot of them were pretty angry, especially when they were told that there was a deadline that they had to meet to implement these controls of December 31, 2017. Why were we not told about this? Oh my gosh, who are these people in the government making us do this thing? I don't understand. And then some of them who found out that that this idea of protecting the nation's secrets happened during the Obama administration, had to make it political and say, oh, to do with Obama. And I'm thinking, oh my God, no, please. Like, this is apolitical. This is completely about trying to protect our nation's secrets. I think we can all agree that's a good thing. So I get a lot of pushback from my clients to implement it. The easy controls are like a little bit of a pain in the butt. Things like multi-factor authentication, FIPS validated cryptography. What do you mean I have to upgrade my firewall because this one is not capable of being put into FIPS mode? Because there was so much pushback on things like that, and they would ask, like literally say, well, Leia, is somebody going to show up at my door and look for this and ask me if I'm doing all these things? And I said, well, honestly, right now, that the answer to that question is no. But I can tell you that if the government is serious about protecting its secrets, looking at you guys and how you're all like really into implementing this, my guess is that there will be a time where there'll be some accountability. Oh my gosh, look at me. Am I a prophet? No, not at all. I could just clearly see that this program was failing, or this requirement was failing. And if it was going to fail and they really cared about their security, something was going to have to happen. Well, for those of us that have heard some of the joint surveillance that was done recently on different organizations to see whether or not they had implemented 800-171, came back that it was 100% failure rate, which doesn't mean that like everyone did nothing. What it meant was if the goal was to fully implement, then 0% of the companies that were assessed by the government actually had full implementation of all the controls. That's dismal. So clearly there has to be some kind of accountability required to assure that implementation. And when CMMC, which I was like, when it came out, I was actually really excited because I'm like, yay, accountability. The clients, though, they're looking at us and desperately saying, we need help. If they're going to knock on our doors and ask us to come and help us with this, like, come and assess what we're doing, like, we need to make sure we're doing the right thing. And I don't get what all this stuff is in here. So I knew that we had to get our rear in gear and then do something with a high confidence that we were providing the right information and the right service and the right guidance. But, you know, frankly, we didn't know anything about this NIST thing. NIST. All right, so I was one of the first people to recognize that was the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and that it wasn't just that, you know, when people would say things like, we have to do the NIST, and I'm like, oh, God bless. I was like, wow, I don't even know where to start this conversation with you. But I mean, I knew a little bit more about it than that, but I was like, I don't know how to make sure we're doing it the right way. So I turned to my good friend, Mark Cuban, who told me RTFM. And for those of you that don't know what that means, it means read the fucking manual. So sorry about the F-bomb there, I do swear a lot, but this is like legitimately how Mark Cuban built his business and how he started when he used to sell copiers. And he didn't know anything about it. That is what he did. He literally read the copier manuals from cover to cover to understand the product so that he could position himself to be the best salesman for copiers, obviously long before he became a billionaire. But I was like, well, if it worked for Mark Cuban, it's going to work for me. So what manual did I read? Every single doc that I could get my hands on. Like what? Like all of these, from the DFARS clauses to NIST 800-53, because I saw very quickly when I was reading the appendices in 800-171 that it kept referencing 800-53. So I was like, well, what is this thing? And so I went and I dug up 800-53, and I had Sarah here, who's on the line with us. Actually, I'm sending her these documents. And I'm like, I need you to print them out. It's too hard to consume all of this. 53 is like 400 pages, front and back. It's like 2.5 inches. It's huge. I read that sucker cover to cover again and again and again. Same with 800-171 and 171A. And then all of those documents also reference other NIST special publications. So I know, guys, I'm telling you, back in the day, like 5 years ago, I thought I had discovered a gold mine. Oh my gosh, NIST has these special publications that are giving us like best practices that all these people put together. I felt like, I was like, yay. It's not Leia's best practices anymore. Hey, NIST put this doc out. So these are just a couple of the ones that I read. There's a ton out there. They're referenced inside of 800-53 and 171. And highly recommend also that you check some of those out. We've read the CMMC model overview, the scoping guide, the self-assessment guide, and took the CMMC certified professional class, as well as dive into and consume the field guide. If you were on the line and you haven't taken the CMMC professional, the CCP class yet, I highly recommend that you do that. If you intend to do any kind of work at all with this kind of compliance, even though the AB right now is saying things that, and it kind of sounds like that you're just supposed to do like the RP stuff and that you only want to do the CCP stuff if you're going to go into doing assessments. I think that's the wrong way to go. There's so much valuable information that you learn about this compliance by going through a CCP class. I took my class through Edward, and it was phenomenal. I can't speak to the other ones, whether they're good or not. All I can tell you is that I had a great experience, and the instructors are awesome. So where did that put us? That put us in the land of trial and error. I just actually talked to my team about this yesterday. I can read a thing. I can, like whether it happens to be a book on business or personal development or whatever it happens to be, I can read it and I can logically understand it. But man, I got to get in there and fail and fail and fail again in order to make those lessons real and relevant. So that's where we landed in the land of trial and error. I'm trying to figure out how are we going to manage compliance across many different clients at the same time, because they all have different environments, different needs, different data flow, different business processes. There's a whole bunch of documentation, have to like create solutions. And that was just, that was challenging. Trying to figure out how to keep track of where they were in the compliance process, because, well, first of all, some of them started out way better than others. Others, it was like, oh, we got to replace everything here because we got problems. Some of them, they were already like not in a bad place. And, we're implementing things, especially like the documentation. Where are we? Does this one have policies? Does this one have an IRP? And that was hard. And then all the compliance activity, because again, it's a program. You do things on a regular basis. How are we going to keep track of all the stuff that we're doing, not only to make sure that we're actually doing the stuff, but then also as evidence for assessment. Then getting them to actually listen to you is still like not as fun, but it was still pretty hard. Like, what are the things I need to say to help them in their language, to help them understand what they needed to do? And then also that I could get a good enough understanding about their business and processes, so I could make sure that I was delivering a solution that made the most sense to them, both from a business process perspective as well as from a cost perspective. And then I had to ask myself, am I doing the right activity to get them to pass an assessment? And am I giving the right guidance? That was very difficult too, because I know that if they fail an assessment, they're not going to be like, oh, gee, that sucks. They're going to say, Leia, what the hell? I've been paying you to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So what do? We had to, so this is the first thing we figured out, okay? We wanted to make sure that we were going to serve our clients with excellence. My company manages and makes decisions through our principles. Our principles are our core values. We have 7 of them. The 7th principle is manage the organization through systems and processes. Well, that seemed like a pretty good place to start. So we dove into the controls and those source documents. We recognized that some of the things in there are actually already what we considered best practices. And I was like, okay, that's good. Good validation that we're giving good advice to everybody. And it's also good that we're already doing some of those things. We tested the creation of a CMMC program across dozens of clients. And I'm telling you, that does a lot for you to learn very quickly. We created documentation and updated that documentation and our processes as soon as we learned more information, or maybe that what we were doing wasn't working, or maybe there was a change in the program, perhaps some clarification, or I talked to some provisional assessors and they're like, no, you got that wrong. It's actually supposed to be like this. So we can go back and update those things immediately. So what does that mean? It means iterate, 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 and iterate. So let's say that you're in a position right now where you're like, where do I start in building my program? Well, if you're an MSP, this is where I recommend you start. Let's start by mapping your staff. First, create a spreadsheet of all the practices and assessment objectives, DAOs. Then map your current security stack and tool set to those practices and objectives and controls. So Think, what do I have in my current security stack or current tool sets that I'm using, and what there would satisfy the different practices and AOs and CMMC. And then map your services and your processes to those practices and AOs, right? Because it's not, like we talked about before, it's not all security stack and it's not all tool sets. Some of it's the stuff that you're doing. What are you doing? Creating user accounts, you're configuring computers, you're doing maintenance on the systems. What other processes do you have in place, like separating users? And map all of those things to your practices, the practices and AOs. And determine the gaps in the tools, practices, and documentation. If you have all that in there, like what's left? What, first of all, is not going to be satisfactorily met about what you're doing right now? And then what else is missing? And then you have to determine which one of those practices and AOs are your responsibility and which are the client's responsibility. Because there is some stuff in there that you're never going to touch, hopefully at least. Things like personnel practices, screening, physical security. Maybe you're not going to do anything with that. And frankly, you're not the one that's issuing keys or fobs and getting those back. So there are clearly things that are always going to be your client's responsibility, and to get really clear on that. Then determine how you're going to address those gaps. So figure out first, is there a technical control that you should put in place? A product, a tool, a configuration, things like firewalls, MFA, AV, IDS, Active Directory, etc. So is there a technical control that would be able to address that gap? Or is there an administrative control that could fill that gap? So not everything has to be a technical control. In some cases, it's almost impossible to put a technical control in place, and an administrative control may be able to fill that gap. Things like policies, plans, procedures, maybe separation of duties, data classification, the hiring and termination processes, etc. Or is there physical control that can be put in place? Things like fences, gates, locks on doors or cabinets, network cabinets that are locked down, and cameras or security systems. And then identify the documentation that's required. You need to come up with some IT policies that's required. If you read the practices, it says specifically there, you must have a policy for, a policy for, a policy for, and then that becomes your Bible. Plans that you need to have in place. There's a collaborative document that guide the management of the program. Things like an incident response plan, that's required. A business continuity or disaster recovery plan. Well, technically, recovery as a practice area was pulled in 2.0, CMMC 2.0, but backing up or protecting CUI is certainly currently in the practices. So if you're backing something up, kind of figuring out how you're going to recover from it is kind of important if you have a disaster. So while it doesn't say explicitly that you have to have it in there, it kind of is implicit that you need to have that. Some documentation on the information flow and how you're going to control that in the organization, the SCI and the CUI. An asset management plan. This was actually another thing. AM was pulled in 2.0, but I say to people, like, if you need to keep track of things like patching, asset lists, encryption certificates, and you don't have some kind of asset management plan at all, I don't know how you're going to actually keep track of those things. So I didn't put that it was required, but I don't know, maybe you can be creative and figure out a way to manage your assets without an asset management plan. A risk management plan, for us, that's a secret sauce to get and stay compliant. Training and awareness plan, which is required. IT processes and procedures. And then you're going to want to have those when we just look at what was done before and do the same thing next time isn't good enough. So I'm going to just make sure real quick. Let me see. All right. So I was actually talking to an MSP the other day, and we were doing a gap assessment, and I asked, and they were a sizable MSP, so we were talking about that. We're like, okay, so like when you create a new user here on the system, like, is there like an SOP? Could you provide that for me of how you create a new user? And you're like, oh, we don't really have that written down. I'm like, oh, no. Like, they basically tell us, create a new user and make sure they have the same access as this person. And then we look to see what how that person is set up. And, we kind of give them the same kind of access. And I'm like, okay, so that's not going to be good enough. So you do need to make sure all that stuff is documented. HR procedures, physical protection procedures, and also data handling procedures. It's highly unlikely that anyone you work with will have all of these things. Highly, highly, highly unlikely. In fact, I've never seen it, and I've done a lot of gap assessments. Now, when you figured out all the gaps and the things that are not there, I'm going to really take a quick sidestep and say, this has been my experience. Please don't use spreadsheets. We tried to use spreadsheets. You can totally do this without a GRC tool. Is what it feels like to manage compliance with spreadsheets. So I really recommend that you choose a GRC tool. My tool of choice is FutureFeed, because it's an excellent GRC. It has the capabilities of linking the shared responsibility matrix, as well as all of those things such as your tool sets and your documentation. You can link them in there directly to the different practices. So that really helps you and an assessor, so that you have evidence for meeting those practices. So I highly, highly recommend that you look at different tools and adopt a GRC to help manage this. It helps you to capture evidence as well. And I've looked at a whole bunch of them, and I love FutureFeed. So, and I also love them because every time I'm like, it would be really cool if it could do this. And then magically it happens. Now, it's a pretty cool company to align with. So we ended up becoming, like, after doing all this trial and error, we did become a sought after CMMC expert in as far as creating the program. Like, how did you do it? OSCs knew if they came to us that we'd have a proven process, because we did it for a lot of other organizations. Our leads went from like a few a month to a few a week. That's pretty freaking cool. Organizations wanted to co-market with us, create programs with us. And I'm like, hey, we got something pretty good right here. We had a lot of questions. Some of that was, why don't they just tell us what to do? If you look at the controls, the practices, like, it doesn't say, get a Meraki firewall and put it in VIPS mode. So, there's, because a lot of it's open-ended, some people didn't like that, you have to make a choice. Now at the same time, I would say, well, if they told you, you have to get a Meraki firewall and do this, then you'd be like, oh, why are they being so restricted about what I can do? You actually want the flexibility, and that's a good thing. And we also, we provided a lot of people with the documentation. They weren't exactly sure how to do with it. They weren't sure how to price their services, how to position their business. So we actually, they asked me, can we buy that from you, like our system? And I said, sure, yeah, you can buy it from me. So we started to teach the organizations how to implement this, and we created an implementation and coaching program so that everyone can get clarity on the controls, what they look like in real life, get accountability to get that stuff done and implemented with the clients. We have a group mind share of really smart people that makes this all better. And then I also bring SMEs to the calls for perspective and knowledge transfer, which is so awesome, because the mind share is really where we all get better together. So this is the thing that I want to make sure that is loud and clear to everyone on this. Don't miss the opportunity. Last year in December, I was down in Miami and I met with Fred Picola, the CEO of Kaseya. Now, I really don't care what you think about Kaseya or what you think about Fred. The point is that the man is the CEO of $1 billion company. They even have a GRC tool. Obviously, his nose is to or ears to the ground, nose is to, like the smell in the air, like where are we going? So when we asked him, what's the biggest trend MSPs should be paying attention to right now? He literally sat up straight, put his arms up and said, compliance is coming. And I was like, okay, not speaking my language, Fred. Compliance is coming. And, of course, when he first said that, I'm only thinking about CMMC because this is my entire world. But then this past year, I was observing a lot of different things. I was observing different kinds of compliances being brought down in a lot of different kinds of industries, whether it was the automotive industry, in financial or insurance industries, and pressure from insurance companies to be compliant in some way in order to even be insured. And I'm like, seems like Fred's got something here. And that's really interesting. So here is the thing, guys, about this opportunity that is important for you to all know. Something that maybe will blow your mind. Once you've figured out how to build any compliance program, you can use that strategy to build any compliance program. Because the fact of the matter is that if you have a system to build and maintain a compliance program, it doesn't matter what the compliance is. You just go back and RTSM. And then when you RTSM and you recognize all of the controls and what has to, like outcomes that have to be met, now you know how to do a compliance program and you can just tweak everything that you're doing for that specific compliance. If you learn how to do this, if you learn how to implement a compliance program, then this entire huge opportunity is open to you. And recognize that MSPs, this is like the net, like when we went from being break fix to managed services and people were like, blow your mind, break fix to managed service. This is that next iteration right now. If you get on board with compliance and compliance programs, learning how to do this, you are at the forefront. You will take all of that business and you will grow quickly during this very uncertain time, a time when we know that a lot of providers are actually going to close shop or fall out of the marketplace because they can't be competitive and they have nothing that can make them stand out in the marketplace. So really quickly, this is our 5-step process for our CMMC compliance program. This is a really high level. We only have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. First, we identify the key data processes and technology for that business. That's because obviously this compliance program is about protecting the data. If we don't identify the data that we need to protect and how it flows throughout the organization, how business processes are connected to it, and the technology that supports those business processes, then there's nothing else we can do. We have to do that first, or we're going to give them the wrong information and wrong guidance. Then we validate the client's CMMC self-assessment. In other words, means we do a brand new gap assessment, because most of the time, the self-assessment that they've done either was done by an organization that did not do a very good job, or they did it internally, did not understand the practices, and then scored themselves entirely too high. We create discrete projects to close the POAM. So yes, I said that the CMMC is not an infrastructure project. However, if you get all this stuff on the POAM, the plan of action and milestones has to be fixed, that is a project, right? You have to create a project to be able to address all of those areas that are deficient. So create discrete projects, and you can show your client, these are the 14 projects, the 5 projects, the however many projects. So we close these, then we close the POAM. And that's not all technology projects, right? Maybe that is something they have to fix a business process in their organizations do align. And then we onboard our IT documentation toolkit CMMC program. The beauty of this, and I'm going to talk about this on a different call, is that part of the program that we implement is risk management. So the risk management plan has a mechanism built in to not only get the client compliant through various systematic ways of checking back in and collecting evidence and realigning the environment, but it also creates a roadmap for everyone so you stay on track, because it can be hard to continue to do this over time. It's the last thing you do. So the key here is you learn it and then you replicate it. So learn how to create a compliance program, replicate that approach, and apply to other compliance requirements and or insurance requirements, right? Because every single one of your clients is probably not a CMMC client, but if you learn how to create a compliance program, then you can just apply this in a different way to all of your other customers and really level up the service you're delivering and charge more for it. This is actually why there are MSPs in their toolkit programs who don't even offer CMMC compliance at all. They are totally in the program just because they want to learn our process of creating a compliance program. And they're like, this is gold. And now I'm just taking everything. I'm taking the documentation, I'm taking these ideas, and I'm applying it to HIPAA compliance. I'm applying it to other kinds of compliances. Somebody asked a question here. Do MSPs that service clients that need CMMC also need to obtain CMMC certification or comparable, such as FedRAMP? Or how do you demonstrate that you do not have access to CUI? That's a really great question. And that's a loaded question. So if you are an MSP and you store, transport, or let me see, store, transport, or somebody help me with the last one. I'm sorry, end of the day. Store, transport, or access. No, it's not access. Another one. CUI. Then process. That's better. CUI. Then you do need to be certified, because that's what the entire program is about. The entire program is about those things: transport, process, and store. That's one of the reasons why we don't do that for our clients, because I'm not interested in taking on that kind of liability. And that's something I think that all of us be thinking, whether or not we're talking about CUI, is really the liability of storing any kind of client data and how we're handling client data. That is an entirely different webinar on that. So if you are hosting data and it's unencrypted format, then you do have to consider whether or not you are a cloud provider. Right now, if you are considered a cloud provider because you're hosting data, then you do have to be FedRAMP moderate at this time. Yes, these are all considerations in what kind of services that you are offering and how you're building your offering, to see whether or not you need to be compliant or with certified for CMMC, or be FedRAMP moderate, or equivalent. We're really not sure about what equivalent means yet, but hopefully some of these things will be answered for us soon. And the other question about how do you demonstrate that you do not have access to CUI? That's a beautiful question. And that's where we come back to, if we go back. Let me not do it that way. The best way to do it is to do this. So this is when we come back to sharing evidence, which is things like documentation. Show me. show me the evidence that you that your organization, your people are not processing, transporting, or why am I processing, transporting CUI. You can use a technical control, such as a tool, a product. You can restrict administrator access to a share that would contain CUI on an on-premises server, as a for instance, and then you have an administrative control in place, internal policies and internal procedures that say that administrators can't grant themselves access to that, and then be able to demonstrate to an assessor, see, let's look at the properties, the admin accounts don't have access to that share. That's an example of how you demonstrate that you don't have access to CUI for one particular. Good question. All right, so we're here, and then we're going to go here. So what do you do now? Is what you do. Join our upcoming webinar so you can learn even more. On the 9th, we're going to teach you how to write an incident response plan. We'll actually provide you with a free IRP directly from our toolkit. And we're going to walk you through how to write that and how to do tabletop exercises and collect that evidence. On the 15th, we're going to talk to you about how we implement that risk management plan for client compliance. And then on the 22nd, we're going to talk about how CMMC is a project, not a journey. So how to stay on the course of the CMMC marathon, especially when we know that this program is going to continue to have changes. So start right now to build your own systematic compliance program. And later, if you feel like it makes sense to you, join the rest of the cool kids in the CMMC Toolkit Coaching and Implementation Program. Because if you are a passionate, mission-driven MSP like me and the cool kids and the program, then please come and join us and the mind share. And for those of you that are on this call, not only will you get a copy of the recording and the slides, but you'll also be invited to these upcoming webinars so you can register. All right. Okay. Now, those are all the questions at this time, and we are actually past time. So if anybody has any final questions, get them in real quick. As if not, we're going to wrap up for the afternoon. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us, and you'll find the recording probably tomorrow, and then invitations to join us for the other webinars will be forthcoming. You have a fantastic afternoon, and keep it real, guys.